Welcome to the beginning of the afternoon plenary. My name is Ari Novi. I'm the Executive Director of the United States Botanic Garden. During yesterday's opening plenary, Christian Semper laid out a compelling vision of Botanic Garden conservation activities building on foundational goals such as the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, Christian highlighted the importance of engaging in the conservation of biodiversity critical to agricultural production, including crops and crop wild relatives. As an aside, for those who are interested in this topic, after Marie's lecture, there will be a symposium titled Leveraging Botanic Gardens to Improve Food Security, Current and Future Trends in Crop Wild Relatives in Room 16. That's the basement, that's the dungeon. With that in mind, and given the importance of botanic gardens to improve crop resource conservation and educate the public on our agricultural production systems, we could not ask for a more appropriate and timely speaker than Marie Haga. Maria is the Executive Director of the Global Crop Diversity Trust. As Marie puts it, the Crop Trust is a small organization with a big mission, which is to ensure the conservation and availability of crop diversity for food security worldwide. Small mission. With many partners, including botanic gardens, agricultural research organizations, and many critical gene banks, including the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, Marie and her team are truly guardians of humanity's food security. Before seeing the light and taking a job working with plants, Marie was a career diplomat for Norway, holding too many important positions to name. She served as an elected member of the Norwegian Parliament from 2001 to 2009, and was later the chair of the governing board of the Industrial Development Corporation of Norway. She's also published 3 books, 2 on Norwegian politics and a novel, and her favorite crop is rice. Ladies and gentlemen, Marie Haga.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thanks a lot also for the invitation. I must say it's really great being here. I'm learning a lot about what you do, and I'm meeting tons of great people. You know, people working with plants have warm hearts. I've always meant that, and that's why it's wonderful to now be in this sector again. My first job in life was actually growing cabbage, just so you know. But now, for the next roughly 45 minutes, we'll speak about food security. Not many think of botanic gardens and their role in food security. But let us take a closer look at that and see where we end. It is certainly worth noting that crop gene banks grew out of botanic gardens. Remember that. But then somehow the two evolved into relatively separate worlds in terms of holdings, policy, target setting, information systems. And you see that on the slide. But I believe that time is ripe to rebuild closer relations between these two worlds. Christian Semper spoke yesterday about how several of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and their targets are dependent on, if they are to be implemented, dependent on conservation and safeguarding of biodiversity. So I just want to say to you, well, let's just get the job done and let us do jointly. I think it's only if we join hands that we actually can implement these goals and targets. Now, we will speak about crop gene banks, crop collections, and let me then just put it in a little bit of context. You've heard about these things several times already, so let me just be brief. We are 7 billion people on the globe now. Will be another 2 billion in 25, 30 years. It's a tremendous challenge to feed those additional 2 billion people. Also because many of us around the globe become more demanding when it comes to food. And we are going to produce this food in a time of climate change. And what the International Panel for Climate Change says is what is said on this slide, namely that if we increase the temperature on the globe with 1 degree, agricultural yields will be reduced with 2%. And you know, unfortunately, the temperature on the globe is not going to increase by 1 degree, probably not 2 either. In many places of the world, it's going to increase, with 3-4 degrees. And the fact of the matter is that we do not really know then what happens on the other side of the equation. We just know that it's going to be awfully challenging to produce the food that the world needs. The basic problem these days for agriculture is that the climate change is so fast that plants aren't able to adapt. Plants, of course, have always adapted. Wheat has its origin in the Middle East, and we now grow it all over the world. But you know, it has taken several thousand years for that wheat to move around. And now it just changes so fast around us that these plants aren't able to follow. So, producing the food we need in the future is going to be challenging. We need to feed more people with more nutritious food. And in order to do it in a way that our environment can manage, we need to produce this food on less land, with less water, with less pesticides, with less fertilizer, generally with less environmental impact. There are many things we've tried, and you've seen some of them you see some of them on this slide. We've tried to use more pesticides, use more fertilizer. We can't do it anymore. We've got to do things differently. There is one resource that we haven't at all utilized to the extent possible, and that is the diversity of crops. We have 7 million crop varieties worldwide. And this diversity is the natural diversity that we use as the raw material when we improve crops. And we can, of course, as you know, do that with traditional breeding methods. We at the Crop Trust are concerned to conserve each one of these varieties. And what do we speak about? Well, we speak about the 3,000 varieties of coconut, or the 4,500 varieties of potatoes, or the 35,000 varieties of corn, the 125,000 varieties of wheat, or the 200,000 varieties of rice. We are concerned to safeguard each one of those because one of them might have the trait that we need in the future to breed a rice that can stand higher temperature, higher salinity in the soil, that can fight a new pest, a new disease, that have higher nutritional value, or quite simply, that tastes better. It's a world out there that we haven't utilized. We can really put biodiversity to much better use than we have up to now. We know we can produce more food. We heard Christian again yesterday spoke about beans from Seat, how they have bred beans with high nutritional value, how they can fight new pests and diseases, etc. It's just amazing what we can do with this diversity. Crop diversity can really do miracles. Just one example. Let's speak about cassava for a second. Cassava has its origin, most likely, in Colombia. It's now grown in, well, of course, in Latin America, in South America. It's also grown quite a bit in Africa and also in Asia. It is grown a lot in, for example, Thailand. In Thailand, they started to grow it at increasingly higher altitudes. And when they did that, suddenly this root disease struck. And cassava in that area was about to be wiped out with all the damaging effect that has on the farmers. Now, of course, scientists tried to work out what can be done. And what could be done was to go to the Genebank in Cali, in Colombia. They had a variety there of cassava that was randomly picked in 1967, and it was that one that solved the problem. And you can see from this slide that the economic value of this solution this little seed there in Kali is absolutely tremendous. So again, crop diversity is an underutilized resource, can do miracles. The thing is, though, that we have lost a tremendous amount of diversity. And Christian, again, he showed you this slide yesterday. And it is dramatic. We've lost a tremendous amount of diversity in the field. The good thing is that not all of this is lost forever, because some of it has been collected by wise people in Genebanks. And we say the obvious here, we can't retrieve what we have lost. What's dead is dead. But we can certainly be wise enough to safeguard what is left, and we can make it available to those who can use it, farmers, breeders, scientists. Now, there is one thing that it's important to mention when we speak about crops, and that is that we are fully interdependent globally when it comes to crops. No country is self-sufficient in crop diversity. Even the United States, in their Genebanks, they have only 10% of the diversity that is available in the world's Genebank. And, you know, the US is good in these things. Crop diversity is a true global common good. There's no way we can be able to feed the world in the future with the food they need if we don't go back to these genetic resources and if we don't share them around the globe. Because when we breed new varieties, we very often base ourselves on material that comes from many, many countries. All right. So the organization that I have the pleasure of heading now, the Global Crop Diversity Trust, Crop Trust, works to ensure the conservation and availability of crop diversity worldwide. And we only have one perspective, and the perspective is forever. We want to safeguard this forever. We are set up to create what is said a cost-effective, rational system for conservation, ex situ conservation. And how do we create that cost-effective, rational global system for conservation? Well, the system has 3 pillars: international collections, key national and regional connections, and the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. As most of you know, there are 11 major international collections around the globe. These are collections held in trust by the CGIR. You know some of them. You see IRI doing mainly rice. We have talked about CIAT in Colombia doing a lot of beans, cassava, other things. Peru have a particular responsibility for potatoes, etc. Now, the Crop Trust have now a management responsibility for these Genebanks. We've had that for 5 years. We are now in the next phase where we will also manage these for another 6 years on behalf of the CGIR. What we have done is that we have introduced reporting tools. We know exactly what these collections, what these Genebanks do. We know how they perform. We have worked then on upgrading these Genebanks. We have introduced quality management systems, and we have secured funding. These collections do hold the most important material in the world, no doubt about it, but they hold far from all. There are altogether more than 1,700 Genebanks around the globe. And most of these are, of course, national. They're regional, or they can belong to universities or whatever. Some of these national or regional Genebanks are in good shape. Others are in terrible shape. We hope now to come to the point where we can work a lot more also with these national and regional Genebanks, trying to secure a fund, work with them in the same way, make sure we know what they have, introduce quality management systems, etc., etc. It is a sad stage with many of them, unfortunately, and we lose material also in the gene banks every day. That can be because of poor management, insufficient funding. It can be because of man-made disasters, war, or it can be because of natural disasters. We see a picture here from the earthquake in Nepal. Actually, then most of the material survived, but we see further at the bottom there from the Philippines, the gene bank there was first struck by tsunami and then by a fire. And we have lost complete gene banks in Iraq, for example. Gene banks been looted in Afghanistan. Because we can't make sure that things don't happen to gene banks around the globe, it's important that we have a backup, and the backup is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And many of you have seen this picture. It's important for me to say that the Svalbard Global Seed Vault is really not the most important in this system. What's more important is the gene banks around the world that day to day make sure that this material is safe, share it with farmers and breeders and scientists, and keep the system running. But let me take you a quick trip to Svalbard. You've got to fly and roughly 6 hours from here, straight north. You're almost on the North Pole, and you see the red arrow there. That is Svalbard. Part of Norway. When you fly up there, you basically see ice, 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 and ice. And up there, you will find 3,500 polar bears. You'll find 12,000 funny-looking reindeers genetically adapted to the climate up there with these huge heads. They're really funny-looking. And there are 2,000 people living up there, and you will find one seed vault. And here we are back to the door. If you go through that door, you walk 130 meters straight into the mountains, then what you will find is just racks, 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 and racks, boxes of seeds. And you know, when I come in there, I feel like I'm in the cathedral. It's so quiet. There are seeds from North Korea, from South Korea, from Russia and Ukraine on the same shelf, all very peaceful. And you know, it is quite touching actually. You know, in there you have now 930,000 varieties of seeds, and it is 12,000 years history of agriculture, and it's potentially also the future of agriculture. So I really hope I can take all of you up there just to get that feel. And you see the box that Ola holds there. That is a box from ICARDA. ICARDA is one of the international gene banks, and it used to operate then in Aleppo in Syria. And we all know what the situation is in Aleppo. Believe it or not, but the seeds in Aleppo are still safe, but they couldn't operate anymore as a gene bank. They couldn't distribute. And you know, we're not after having seed museums around the world. If the material can't be used, it doesn't make any sense. So it was decided then in September 2015 that we for the first time would take seeds out of the vault, 1/3 of what ICARDA had up there, took the seeds partly to Morocco and partly to Lebanon. These have now been grown out. The gene bank is re-established in these two countries. And in February this year, the seeds came back to Svalbard. So we're now filling up the shelves again. And that is how Svalbard is meant to be used. You know, if things do go wrong around the world, it is awfully comforting to know that there is a place we can go and retrieve material. Again, what's lost is lost forever. The idea is that we don't lose more than we have lost already. So that is sort of the structure of the global system. International gene banks, national, and a Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Not complicated. Slightly complicated to know what's going to fit in there, but we have scientists working on that. We do not at all have everything in everything we want in crop gene banks in them for the time being. Crop wild relatives is of utmost interest. A lot of collecting is still needed. these crop wild relatives, as you probably know better than I, most of you, is that they are awfully interesting. They have seen a lot, they have survived a lot, and many of them have traits that we are in dire need of right now. When we, for example, want to breed plants that can survive and give good yields with less water. So we have the privilege of running a 10-year project dedicated to crop wild relatives. It's funded by the government of Norway. There are a couple of people from Norway in the room. The unique thing is that it's 10 years, as I said, it's a $50 million project. We're working on 29 gene pools, collecting in 24 is the number countries. The 10 years are divided in phases. So we did a huge gap analysis, set priorities, then it's a collecting phase. It's still ongoing to some extent. We've started the pre-breeding and evaluation phase, and there is a conservation phase in the end. You can hear more about this project in a session later on, as was already mentioned. Now, botanical gardens are involved in this very unique project. The project is co-managed by us then and the Millennium Seed Bank, and you see here that the Millennium Seed Bank has contributed a lot. There are also botanic gardens that are collecting partners, and we, of course, value this cooperation tremendously. So here we see one link already. We'll get to more. Now, collecting, getting the material in the gene banks that needs to be there is important. We can't manage these things without information systems. Again, we don't want seed museums. We want the material to be used. Information systems is, in many ways, the bridge between the conserved material and the use. We are operating Genesis. It has now 2.2 million accessions described in it. We're also operating a Green Global, which is a management tool for gene banks. All right, so these are things we do to safeguard this material. Our job is to build the system, safeguard what needs to be safeguarded, and then it is also to fund this, ladies and gentlemen. And believe it or not, if we look at the major crops for food security, when we have developed a cost-effective and rational system, it only requires $34 million a year to safeguard this material. We are set up as an endowment fund because government said that this material is too important to be left to uncertainty, so we got to make sure that there is annual funding available. So in order then to have these $34 million a year available, you need an endowment fund of $850 million. We are working our way up there, having roughly $200 million now in the fund. You will see here that the book value is still more higher than the contributions that have come in. And in addition to that, we have spent $22.8 million on gene banks in this period. So the endowment mechanism works, no doubt about that. But it's quite a way then, from 200 million to 850. So fundraising is an important job that we're doing. We see what I guess you guys see, namely that it's getting increasingly difficult to get money from governments. If you look at development cooperation, that is at the best leveling out. We see also that more and more development cooperation goes to emergencies. And I think it's unavoidable, the way, for example, media runs. You are probably not as dependent on governments as we have been, but we have realized that we need to look into completely other sources. We do not give up on governments, of course we don't, but we got to be more creative. We will now accept loans. We hope a government, we're about to receive a loan of roughly $50 million US, and the German government will pay down the interest. That's one way we can work together, private and governmental. We are absolutely trying to put private sector to work also for global common goods. We have developed a so-called investment sharing facility with Deutsche Bank that we hope will yield results. We are also trying to involve private sector in other ways. And just one example, we have just developed a strategy for conservation of coffee with great help from World Coffee Research. Now, coffee is extremely climate sensitive, and it's a huge, huge business globally. 170 billion a year. And, you know, we actually think that when we have developed the strategy, when we know how to conserve this diversity, then we really think that the major companies should contribute to funding it, to funding the strategy. I mean, what would a Starbucks, an Illy, a Nespresso be without coffee? Wouldn't be much, would it? It's only fair that they should contribute financially. And I think this is the way we got to involve private sector in the time ahead. I don't know if you're going to be successful, but you could imagine going crop by crop and speak to the various sectors and see, okay, where do they have interest? If they want to be in business in the time ahead, they got to safeguard the basis for their business. Anyway, so much about money. You can speak about that for days, of course. Now, we have finally got the acceptance from the governments of the world that there needs to be a major effort to safeguard agricultural biodiversity. The UN Sustainable Development Goals is a fabulous global agenda, in fact. It's really a good political work that was done to develop these goals and targets. Goal number 2 is about ending hunger. And there is a target there, 2.5, which speaks explicitly about the need to conserve the diversity of all kinds of agricultural biodiversity, to be precise. The Crop Trust and other partners worked hard to get this language into the SDGs. And then suddenly the language was there. And then we said, oh boy, what do we do now? Somebody has to implement this. Huh? And so we were thinking, okay, what do we do now? We have this target. It speaks directly to us. We have organizations. We have a responsibility in this field. What do we do? How do we go about it? And so we have ended up with establishing what we now call Food Forever. And again, Christian Samper mentioned that yesterday. A little bit more, can you say, meat on the plant? The point of departure for Food Forever, and you see the slides change a little now, and it says Food Forever in the corner. And that is because Food Forever goes far beyond the Crop Trust. We took the initiative, but we now have the Dutch government as part of the secretariat structure, and we hope others will come on board. We're very, very early phase in this. The point of departure is the same as we've talked about. Agrobiodiversity is a prerequisite for food and nutritional security. The challenge ahead is that we need to produce more food that is good for you, good for farmers, and good for the planet. We take as a point of departure in Food Forever that conservation or implementation then of target 2.5 is doable. It's politically doable, technically doable, financially doable. That, of course, raises a question again. Why hasn't it been done? And our analysis tells us that it's mainly because of 2 reasons. The lack of awareness at the decision-making level in private sector or in politics, and due to the organizational fragmentation that we have in this tiny area. You know, there are tons of organizations somehow devoted to conservation and use of agricultural biodiversity. And that doesn't help when you want to put pressure on politicians and decision makers in private sector. There is, of course, one more reason, I think, and that is that this guy, of course, is just so much cuter than this, huh? Having said that, and Christian, you will love this from Siat, I mean, these beans are beautiful, aren't they? They are, well, maybe not cute, but I would consider them as pieces of art, aren't they? So we shouldn't lay down flat for the cuteness. We have a lot to show. Food Forever is a coalition of the willing. It's people who want to work towards the same goal coming together. We have champions. Christian is one of them. We have partner organizations. These champions, they come from all over the place. They come from science, they come from politics, they come from NGOs, they come from private sector. And partner organizations can be basically any that want to work towards the common goal, which is then to safeguard ag biodiversity. The thinking is quite simply that everybody puts in a little bit. They do more than they normally would have done. It's like creating rings in the water, and you know, when all these comes together, it's a huge fountain, and that will even impress some politicians and decision makers. I'm absolutely sure this can be done. And you know, there are just so many things people can do, and we just put a few things on here. The idea, quite simply, is to create fuss and noise and, you know, make people understand, because there is a fabulous lack of understanding out there. We launched the initiative. It's very early on still, and we want so many to come on board. We launched the initiative in Stockholm 2 weeks ago in conjunction with the Stockholm Food Forum, organized by the foundation called EAT. The president of Mauritius that you see here, she is the chair of the initiative, a scientist herself. We had, as part of the EAT conference, 500 people in the room, crown princes and stuff, all good. Here are 4 of our champions, just so you see what kind of people they are. This is from a panel discussion we had. So you'll see on this side, you see the DG of SIAT, Ruben Echeverria. You'll see Alejandro there, whose last name skips me now. He's been working a lot with indigenous networks. He's sort of the brain behind the potato park in Peru to a large degree. You see the president of Mauritius there, and you also see Nicolas Mouron, who is the head of Deutsche Asset Management, which is one of the world's biggest world's biggest asset management portfolios. So a good mix of people. And that is what we're striving at. And that is also why I'm so eager to speak to you guys, because we, of course, also want to have you on board. And let me end by that. You know, it is so that botanic gardens already do have a role in food security. As we say here, though not your main mandate, botanic gardens do play a role. You have, for example, a much better outreach to the general public than we have from the crop side. You reach out to millions and millions. We don't do that on a day-to-day basis. And the idea with Food Forever is that we not only engage policymakers initially, because we don't think we will be able to fully engage them unless we have a movement under here that pushes these people to make the right decisions. So we would be very eager to use the network that you have to reach out to regular people who can put pressure up. You, of course, do other important things for food security. Your collections are important also for food plants. and you have good sources of scientific data that, of course, is useful also in a food security context. We'll have to speak more about how botanic gardens can be involved. We'll continue to speak with Paul Smith and others around in this room about that. But just some very rough ideas. We could maybe cooperate on the big picnic. I think that's a fascinating concept that you are developing, some of you. Could it be that we could have a section on food plants in all botanical gardens? Some of you do, some of you don't. Could we maybe, Food Forever, maybe contribute with a toolkit so it's easier to have these kinds of presentations? Could we have you get in touch with all your members and have them signed what we are about to develop, and you'll see it on our webpage, the Declaration of Interdependence. We want tons of people, millions of people to sign that. Maybe you can help us with that, to reaching high numbers. Why not have garden parties with chefs? Use the best chefs you have around in the country, in the region, in your local community, and challenge them to develop the most diverse meals they can think of. There are so many things we can do, and I really hope that we can work more jointly on this. I think there are specific things that we in the crop could help out with, for example, on quality management systems and these things, but in a Food Forever context, it's really only to use your imagination and think, what can we do to engage people? So my last slides is quite simply a general invitation to cooperate more closely. I think we can benefit a lot more from each other than we do today. So that's the general invitation. And I have then a more specific invitation for all of you in various capacities to join Food Forever. And by working together, we can do a big job. You know, we can do an important job for humankind by safeguarding genetic material. And we can also give the world a success story, because it's fully possible to conserve the diversity of ag products. Thank you very much for the attention.
So we do have time for a few questions, if anybody has any.
South China Botanic Garden. I have one question. I believe it's very important to keep all the heritage, the diversity we have, and also advance of the technology and mass production, the efficiency to feed everybody. What do you think about the GMO, genetic modifications? As I know, in Europe, it's very big resistant. Even today in China, they're resistant. The doubt about the technology is actually increased. So what do you balance this? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We in the Crop Trust, we quite simply do not take a stand with regard to GM. Our mandate is to safeguard the diversity of these crops. And we don't go beyond that. We make it available to farmers and breeders and those who can use it. But beyond that, we do not go. And we say it's not up to us to decide how the material is going to be used. That is up to political decision makers. So in a way, it's a little bit weird for me, coming from a political environment, to say that we just keep out of all political discussions, but that's what we do. And I'm very firm on that. That is what we want, because the only job that we want to do is the job we are set to do, and that is to safeguard the diversity, the biodiversity out there. And then we leave it up to others to decide how to use it.
Hello, Sean Hoban from the Morton Arboretum. You talked about sort of getting the job done. How do you set a target for when you've reached that goal in terms of number of genes or number of varieties, or what is the full complete set to conserve?
So that is also a good question, and we of course then we have to find some boundaries for our work, and we are at the outset an organization working on food security. So we have taken as a point of departure the major crops for food security. So when we have calculated, for example, these, the annual amount that we need, the $34 million US, then we have quite simply taken the 25 most important crops for food security, seen from the perspective of the least developed countries, and calculated from there. You are right, alluding to the fact that there are more crops out there that we need to conserve, but we had to start somewhere, and in the longer run, these numbers and figures might change, but as a point of departure, we've taken the most important crops for food security, seen from LDC's point of view.
I think we have time for one more question.
Peter Enns, University of Zurich. Could botanical gardens get your label, Food Forever, if they do certain work?
You know, that's one of the things that, as you understand, Christian Samper is one of our champions, and we've talked about this quite a bit. And, you know, it's a cool idea to sort of certify things with Food Forever. And why not? Let's discuss that. Could we certify botanical gardens as Food Forever gardens? Could we certify certain restaurants in the long run as Food Forever restaurants? You know, there's no limit to what we can think of. And it's an excellent question. Let's continue to discuss it. I'd love to work out something in that along those lines.
Hello, can I? Zachariah from Malawi.
I'm afraid we don't have enough time to continue. I'm sure Marie will be happy to hang around. And we do have this session coming up on crop world relatives where we can get into some of these topics as well this afternoon. But thank you, Marie. Thank you all for coming.